is RealAg Live. And welcome to RealAg Live, everybody. I'm your host today, Shaun Haney. Give you a sneak peek there for a second. I'm your show, Shaun Haney. Looking forward to today's discussion. We got a great one for you today, really breaking down a super important topic when it comes to agricultural trade. We're going to talk specifically about China today. Really looking forward to it. Of course, it's a topic where farmers and ranchers across the country have kind of conflicting views on how they feel about China and some of the things that they do as a country. But of course, it is a very important market for our agricultural commodities, and we're going to dig deep into it today with our two guests on our panel. If you have any feedback on today's show, I'd love to hear from you. All you have to do is enter your question, your comment in the box, whether you're watching on YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook. And I do want to remind everybody, tonight, 8 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Mountain, The Agronomist, exactly where you're watching this show, you can watch that one. And they're focusing tonight, it'll be hosted by Lindsay Smith, and they're focusing on planting and seeding depth and how that leads to higher yields and a healthier plant, and honestly, better profits for you. And that's what's all important. Let's bring in our guests. There they are. We've got Sharon's son from the Canada West Foundation. Sharon, how are you?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's great to chat with you again. We've had you on before, and really appreciate you joining us again. And you also brought along with you Carlo Dade from the Canada West Foundation. Carlo, how are you doing?
Shaun, I love doing your show.
Well, it's great to chat with you. Always love our interactions and debate. So now China is out with a new 5-year plan. Carlo, is this something, when I say this is new, this isn't necessarily a new concept for China to have something like this, where they sort of set some pretty high benchmark in a whole bunch of different categories?
No, it certainly isn't, neither for China, neither for other countries in the developing world. 5-year plans, some of your listeners, those who grew up during the Cold War, may remember 5-year plans from the Soviet Union or elsewhere. But this is a different type of national planning instrument. Those old 5-year plans used by developing countries, those old 5-year plans used by the Soviet Union, East Germany, have had a modern reincarnation into more just national planning documents where you're intending to guide the economy by setting goals for certain sectors. So you're not setting hard production targets. Workers unit in Section 5 will pour so many miles of concrete this year. Instead, you're saying we want to become more innovative, and we're going to target these sectors and these investments to promote innovation in the economy, or we're going to target agriculture to improve yields by investing in science and providing incentives. So it's a different type of development plan. And currently today, like 135 developing countries have national development plans, and that's doubled in the past decade. So certainly this is, my background is international development. And for me, a national development plan is just what countries that are trying to leave poverty do.
So Sharon, is this a component of the Belt and Road Initiative, or is this like not related? Where does that fit in?
That's a good question. So, the 5-year plan is in itself an item on its own. As Carlo said, it's basically the economic and development plan for China, usually for the next 5 years. Since Belt and Road Initiative has been one of China's quite important initiatives, we do see that being reflected in the 5-year plan in terms of further regional integration and cooperation. And so it's definitely mentioned in the sense of how all of these strategies and policies all come together and how they're interrelated to each other. But it is not just on its own, the Belt and Road.
So Sharon, I'll admit to you, when I first saw Carlo's email on this topic, my head jumped right away to sort of some of the economic battle between the U.S. and China. And China coming up with a 5-year plan was not necessarily in the best interests of Canada. Is that a fair presumption for me to make?
I think that's a common presumption, but we have to again keep in mind that the 5-year plan is not, it's not like China suddenly introduced this 5-year plan. You know, China has been producing 5-year plans since 1953. It's just that this one, at the end of the 5-year, now they're introducing a new one. What's interesting about this new one is that it's not just the next 5 years; it's even longer. There's elements that are extended to 2035. And so that's the reason why we're analyzing this, because given the current situation, given the current international environment, and also given the fact that, you know, Canada and China is at an all-time low in terms of bilateral relations, this document lays out where China is going in the next 5 to 10 years. So it would be really useful for us to understand where China is going, to at least increase some predictability and not be taken by surprise in, you know, based on the preliminary ideas and goals that China has laid out.
In a very, very important trading partner from an agricultural perspective. Carlo, can you give us some examples of where they're going? What are some of the components of this plan that we should be really paying attention to?
Sure. I would just note quickly, though, that with this plan, even if you're not trading with China, given the size of the Chinese economy and their impacts around the globe, this plan can have impacts on the global market, or it could have impacts in other markets that are competitors or where we're trying to sell goods. So that's the second important component. Where the plan's going, interestingly, this plan marks a major shift from previous 5-year plans. With this plan, President Xi has announced that China is exiting what they call the era of moderate prosperity, or having the attempt to achieve moderate prosperity. And Sharon's smiling. We argue about this all the time, but trying to achieve moderate prosperity is a goal. Translating that from the Chinese, in essence, the country thinks that they've left the stage of underdevelopment and have reached middle income status. And they're now trying to break out of middle income status to grow to become a developed country. This is known as the middle income trap. And very, very few countries, only a dozen, around roughly a dozen around the planet, have managed to leave middle income status to become developed. So if you think about that sort of change, what does that mean for how the country changes how they run their economy? The economic growth and the economic development path that got you out of underdevelopment into middle income status means using cheap labor, using cheap resources. But if you want to make the next leap, using cheap labor and cheap resources won't take you there. You have to become more innovative. You have to become more efficient in terms of agricultural production. You have to shift workers from agriculture. So if indeed President Xi is correct, and this is the end of the era of moderate prosperity and their attempt to break through, then you can think of all sorts of potential impacts, including focusing on consumer demand, in focusing their efforts to grow agriculture to make it more efficient, more modern, more mechanized, more productive, and less environmentally harmful. So those are some potential impacts for us.
Okay, Sharon, we got a question here from Lara, and I like to really dig into the depths of this and really geek out on the topic of China and what they're doing around the world. But Lara brings up a good point. Everybody is not necessarily focused on this as much as you are. She asks, what is the Belt and Road Initiative? Let's back up to that to make sure that all the audience is on the same page.
I don't know, Carlo, if you want to take a first stab at it. But
sure. No, go ahead. I'll follow.
Okay, so the Belt and Road Initiative is basically just an initiative proposed by China to further integrate the region in terms of trade, but mostly in terms of infrastructure development. And so infrastructure development has subsequent implications for us, when we focus on agriculture, more regional integration would be more flow, more inflow of agricultural imports from its regional neighbors rather than from Canada, for example. Carlo, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah. So if you think about China becoming the largest economy on the planet, replacing the US in 2030 or something, this has huge implications for the movement of goods around the planet. China is trying to address or trying to fix global trade infrastructure that was built for Europe, that was built to move goods from, say, Africa to Europe or the underdeveloped world to the industrialized West. It's trying to add to that to make sure that global trade infrastructure also functions for China, that is now the world's largest economy. So going to Kazakhstan and investing in inland ports so that wheat, grain can flow from Kazakhstan to China, something that wouldn't be of much interest to Canada or the US, which export grain. So this is a bit of the Belt and Road. It mirrors what the Americans did in the 1960s with something called the Alliance for Progress. This was John F. Kennedy government's program to try and develop Latin America by investing heavily in democracy, but also in infrastructure and development projects to link the region to the US and to facilitate trade with the US. So throughout history, you've seen countries that rise globally have to invest to remake the global architecture to fit their rise. And this is along the lines of that past trajectory.
Now, Carlo, sorry, go ahead, Sharon.
Oh, I was just going to add, just to add to Carlo, so the Belt and Road Initiative has evolved tremendously, over the last 5 years, in the sense that the initial objective was really focusing on the infrastructure investment and cooperation with its regional neighbors, but now it has expanded to many other areas. They call it the digital Silk Road, and Arctic Road, and so on. So it's really expanded to cover many different areas under the Belt and Road Initiative. And I think that the Chinese government will at some point need to revisit to kind of structure and confine, or at least provide clarity to the direction of where they want to go next with this Belt and Road Initiative.
No, but Carlo, hasn't some of this come with, like, there's that railroad to nowhere where there was a big railroad that was abandoned, and there's been some financial transactions with countries like Pakistan that really sort of question China's intent on some of these things? Because it does sound like it makes a lot of sense, but in the background, there's been some stuff happening that one has to question kind of what exactly they're really up to.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, there have been bridges to nowhere, loans that have political dimensions to them. But again, if you go back to the Alliance for Progress and you look at the history, and again, my background, spending a lot of time working on development in Latin America, it reads like the same rap sheet.
Yeah.
So, the money that was wasted, and the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank financing bridges to nowhere, that is, unfortunate as it is, that almost seems to be a naturally occurring byproduct of these sorts of development initiatives.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Sharon.
Just to add to that, that's definitely, there are definitely failure and success cases, but this is definitely a learning experience for China, and we've seen dramatic growth in terms of the Chinese government taking into consideration of their lessons, to make more efficient and effective investments and cooperation. So we definitely have seen changes and learnings on the China front.
Okay.
Yeah, but from my mind, the most frustrating thing about the Belt and Road is that the Chinese refuse to learn the lessons of the mistakes that the Americans made with the Alliance for Progress and the British before them. They're insisting on making the same mistakes out of, I don't know, arrogance or lack of
Or
familiarity.
maybe they just don't even know about this. Who
That's
knows?
another possibility. But for those of us that study these things, you're banging your head against the table and saying, "Have you not read a history book? Did you not pay attention when the Americans did this?"
Yeah. So okay. So what's the mistake? Like,
So the
let us in.
mistake. So the political, letting political considerations override, not doing the due diligence to develop a return on investment analysis on projects, the whole 9 yards. Your bridge to nowhere occurs through a fairly complex but fairly understandable set of circumstances, political needs to move money for projects and things like that. The history and the failures are fairly evident for some of us who lived through them. My time at the World Bank, I got to see some of this stuff firsthand, and it's kind of frustrating to see it again.
Okay. So let's talk about the impacts on agricultural trade.
Yeah, let's go back to
Peas.
5-year plan.
Yeah, peas, wheat, canola, beef, pork, all of and more. China is a customer you cannot ignore.
Yeah.
When we look at this 5-year plan, what from an agricultural trade perspective, what are some of the things we really should keep in mind, and what are some of the impacts of this 5-year plan on some of these exports? Who wants to? Sharon, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Well, on the 5-year plan, I just also want to mention that we are hosting a symposium on this. It's a 4-day symposium starting on May 10. And essentially, we have broken down the 5-year plan in terms of providing context on what the 5-year plan is, why it is important for Canada, and what aspects are important for Canada, because not every aspect of the 5-year plan is relevant for us. And then we've identified a couple sectors or industries that is important for Western Canada. So we will have a session on agriculture specifically, on energy and the environment, so climate change objectives and so on. And then the last part is on services. So how this 5-year plan will impact or change some of the education and tourism industries, particularly after COVID. So that's happening from May 10 to May 14. Now, on the agricultural front, um, just as Carlo has mentioned on some of the things that are inside the 5-year plan, one of the key new things in this 5-year plan that's different from the past is China has changed from an export-oriented economy to an economy that is driven by expanding domestic markets and domestic consumptions. Now, that has both positive and negative effects on Canada. Negative effect being expanding domestic market and domestic consumption would mean that China needs to increase its self-sufficiency in production, in agricultural production capabilities, right? Whether that is, wheat or soy or so on. But taken in, also take in mind that China won't be able to produce everything to meet its population. So from that perspective, we would have opportunities to grow import in agricultural products, both in certain areas of traditional and also in new areas as um, consumers, increase their choice. And so that's something that we will discuss at our symposium, and in terms of further analysis of what kind of specific products. Um, Also, the 5-year plan is not the only signal that we can take in terms of how it would impact Canadian agricultural export. We also have to consider our competitors, right? So we know that most recently the US China signed a phase one agreement in January 2020 with both um, 2-year commitments on certain agricultural purchases, but also more importantly on structural changes. So there are structural commitments that, whether that's the time to to process, or the time for the committee to agree or allow new GM trades or so on. There are schedules in place between US and China for this. And this is something that we don't really have with China. We have, aside from the canola MOU back in 2016, which has already expired, we don't really have that other kinds of trade agreements aside from our investment agreement in place to kind of address some of the non-tariff barrier issues that Canada has had more recently with China. And that's in place between US and China. And while the 2-year commitment is really not as important as the long-term structural agreement, we've seen in 2021 that China has already met, as of March 2021, China has already met 85% of US target. So what does that mean for Canada? So we'll definitely see increased competition in soy, in wheat, right? But it could also mean that we will see export redirection. So that goes into our diversification, and the canola example is a good example
Hmm.
for that in 2019.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah, so,
go ahead, Carlo.
so some of the other areas, as Sharon mentioned, we're going to do 90 minutes just on the agricultural components of the 5-year plan. And I forget how many chapters are in the plan, but it's massive. It's thousands of pages. And so we're going to have the expert from the embassy in Beijing, who's been studying this, come on to talk about this. And we've got a couple other folks who have taken deep dives into the agricultural components. But to give you another example, ag technology. So a major focus of this plan is innovation and technology. And our specific references to agricultural technology to improve production, to increase efficiency, and to cut back on environmental harms. So for the ag tech sector, the ag machinery sector, there are potential both in the 5-year plan creating new market opportunities, creating new opportunities for partnership with Chinese companies to reach more difficult third world markets where China has a knack for making products that can be afforded in lower income markets, but obviously also as a competitor. And that would be a major issue for us. So it's not just the agricultural change in production, it's the changes in technology, it's the changes in environmental goals and standards that are coming out that could see impacts. And of course, we've seen one country in the developing world bounce back from COVID, and we've seen other major markets like India and Brazil and Africa take massive, and Pakistan, huge market, take massive hits. So if the 5-year plan is successful in moving China from middle income status in terms of potential for a lot of the goods we export, you're looking at a country with consumers who may have money in a world where the global middle class has taken a couple steps back.
Yeah. So when you look at the size of what the commodities that China is buying, to say that what, we're going to be self-sustainable, or we're going to produce more of these things at home, that is like a task of monumental size. And just look at pork, for example, and China's lack of a good record on managing disease, because we're building these the 6-level stacked pork operations, and look at the outbreak of ASF and some of the challenge they've had. So Sharon, this is not exactly easy to say, difficult to do.
Exactly. And I mean, just in terms of the market size, right? Just looking at 2019-2020 numbers, Canadian ag exports to China grew by 46%. So 6.3 to 9.3 billion dollars. And this is only because China was one of the first ones to recover from COVID. So and China is able to meet US's crazy 2-year commitment, annual commitment of $37 billion of agriculture purchase from US in 2020 and 44 billion for 2021. And they're expecting China being able to meet US's 2021 targets. So that alone shows the massive size of Chinese market, and the fact that our trade with China is still growing despite our, all-time low bilateral relations, I think that says something, and I think that's the reason why we are looking into these signals of where China is going.
Carlo, have we paid too much attention to the relationship? I'm using air quotes for all of you listening to the podcast. In the sense that, like Sharon says, all-time low in terms of the quality of the relationship. Two Michaels detained in China. Of course, we've got the situation with the Huawei CFO in Vancouver. Nasty words, passive aggressiveness, kind of maybe in both directions, I guess you could say. Yet China's buying more ag commodities than ever from a country like Canada. And that's one thing I've pointed out on U.S. shows several times is that there's the phase one deal, but Canada doesn't have it, and they're buying like crazy out of Canada too. So at the end of the day, relationship be damned. If they're going to need the products, they're going to buy them no matter how poor the relationship is. Is that fair, Carlo? Oh, hold on, I got you on mute. Hold on. Sorry, go ahead, Carlo.
Yeah, as long as the market's open and they have the ability to buy from us. Remember in the 1950s, during China's greatest famine, the U.S. imposed an embargo on wheat against China. So as long as we avoid embargoes and things like that, yes, the sales will continue. We are not a command and control economy. We are a free market economy. Private sector actors make decisions based on rational self-interest. And if that's the case, you're going to continue to see the Viterras, the Richardsons, and the others move Canadian product to the Chinese market. We got rid of the wheat board. We have no control, really, other than embargoes, sanctions, or other things about doing this. And on the other hand, too, Canadians are also buying more goods from China. It's not just the export stats that are up, the imports. Every Saturday at Costco, millions of Canadians make decisions to continue to buy from China despite the relationship. And to be fair, if you look at China, Chinese consumers are boycotting products from countries with which China is having difficulty. H&M, Nike, the NBA. Chinese consumers will look at goods and make decisions. Canadian consumers don't have the same discipline. So we may say we don't like China, but individuals will not exercise the one power that they do have to do anything about it. And just one quick note, China's success with self-sufficiency, on the one hand, pork, on the other hand, wheat. China's done well to develop wheat production in the country. Where they have a priority and where they set their mind to it, eventually, not initially, not without much error and stumbling and mistakes, but eventually they can put enough resources, enough political will, and enough discipline to work through problems to have success. So I wouldn't let initial failure dissuade me or discount my thinking about what China can do. What would be a failure for us that would topple a government and abandon an effort in China is just a stumbling block, and it won't deter them from keeping at it until they get there. So you got to change your political analysis with them. It's not Canada. It's a country that can implement rigor and discipline to achieve economic goals. To eventually achieve economic goals.
Yeah. So Sharon, how do we balance off the opportunity for Canada to make adjustments to fit what China's doing in the future with when they put out a 5-year plan, trying to meet some of the consumers, you in any sort of business you want to see where your customers are headed, right? And so in this case, if we pay attention to that, how do we balance it off with some of that poor relationship? Where we do have the two Michaels detained, and there are people out there saying we need to do less business with China because they're doing these kinds of things, human rights violations. How do we balance all this off?
Well, isn't that the billion-dollar question? I think one of the things that we can do is look at what our competitors are doing. Australia, US, they all have their own issues with China, and they're all engaging China still in many levels, right? Australia recently signed with China the largest regional trade agreement, RCEP. It's called Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and US in 2020, US signed a US China Phase One, and so all of these allies of ours who are also our competitors in trade, especially for agriculture, is still engaging China in all levels, and is still signing agreements with China. So I think there's lessons and implications there. Furthermore, just on the ag front, the 5-year plan clearly shows new areas, um, new self-sufficiency in certain ag technology and agricultural areas. But at the same time, they know they are anticipating the the growth in their market, in the domestic demand. And so you've already seen that China has unilaterally opened up new products, new species, um, of agricultural import products. I'm just trying to get, so it was actually this year, they had a new list of countries that they allow or permit export of grains and raw plant-based. And there's products such as corn, such as potatoes that we export a lot of that were not on this list. So China recently allowed US to export potatoes. It's allowing Laos to export sweet potatoes. And we're not on any of these items. We're still on, canola, we're still on wheat, we're still on soy, but these are the opportunities that we're missing. And while we can get all of the signals of where China is going next, if we're not going to do anything about it, we're just going to let our competitors, take our lunch, I guess.
Carl, you want to add to that?
Absolutely. So that last point about having our lunch eaten, during the NAFTA negotiations with the Trump administration, the Americans slipped in the clause at the last minute. A completely toothless, meaningless, no power behind it clause to try and dissuade us from negotiating with China. While we in Canada were sitting in the corner, quaking in our boots and soiling ourselves, the Americans went behind our backs and signed their own agreement with China, an agreement that focused primarily and overwhelmingly on agriculture. They basically just shivved Canadian farmers in the back. This is a country that's practically fighting a hot war with China, yet that did not dissuade them from trying once again to run over Canadian farmers. So Sharon's point, we absolutely have to look after Canadian interests. Our allies, who are our competitors, are not hesitating to try and take market share while at the same time dealing with political issues in Canada. In Canada, we tend to focus on the political, and that prevents us from even talking about having these sorts of conversations about the agricultural relationship. On diversification, one of the ways to look at the changing the trade relationship with China is to change the products we export. So instead of exporting raw peas, if we export pea protein or plant-based protein from fractionated peas, that's not going to China. That's going to other markets. China's awash in plant protein from using our peas to make noodles. So if we do value added here in Canada, that sends us not to the Chinese, but it sends us to other markets. With canola, if we crushing here in Canada for a biofuel additive, that's 2.5 million tons a year that's not going to China. It's staying here in Canada. New products create new markets. The question is, how do you get new products? Well, you have your own quote unquote 5-year plan. So 5-year plans move underdeveloped countries to developed status. Developed countries don't have 5-year plans. We have industrial policy. We target those areas, those specific areas of our economies where we need to develop new opportunities or we want to become more innovative. So putting money into a supercluster to create the capacity to do more value added naturally leads to product or end market diversification. Developing a clean fuel standard and using canola for fuel has got all sorts of downsides. And you get environmentalists on the show, and they can run food. But from a food security, from a trade security, and from a national security perspective, from a diversification perspective, this makes a lot more sense. So you need to get out of the dependency pathways of traditional exports. People like doing the same product to the same markets. It's easy. The infrastructure's there. The relationships are there. You know what you're getting into. And you get stuck in these pathway dependencies. One way to change them is by changing the product mix. You can have all the trade commissioners you want trying to move more raw bulk canola into new markets. But at the end of the day, there are only so many new markets. You come up with a new product, and it's a whole new ball game.
Great stuff. I really, really appreciate it. We're out of time. I really, really appreciate this insightful discussion today. This is such a critical topic for agricultural producers across the country, across all the different crops and livestock. This is a market we cannot ignore, and trying to sort it out is like, I think, Sharon, like you said, that's the $1 million complex question. So hopefully today we're able to break that down for everybody. Hey, Carlo, go ahead.
Don't forget the symposium. So next week.
How do people find out about it? Where do they go?
Go to the Canada West Foundation. It's on the front page. All of next week, every morning, we have a session about a different aspect of the 5-year plan. Our ambassador to China is coming on the first day. We have one of the think tanks, one of the Chinese think tanks that was responsible for developing the plan, joining us on the first day to talk about it. And then we'll do a deep dive on agriculture on May the 11th. So Monday, May the 10th, early in the morning. Your listeners are up early in the morning anyway.
Always.
Out to see, tune into Canada West, and you'll be able to get some real insights.
Awesome stuff.
So,
Hey, go ahead, Sharon.
I just wanted to add, so that's cwf.ca for
you.
Canada West Foundation.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Sharon, have yourself a great day. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
And Carlo, always great to chat with you.
Stay safe, man.
Hey, make sure everybody tune in to The Agronomist tonight, 8 o'clock Eastern, 6 o'clock Mountain, exactly the same spot we were watching this show, realagriculture.com/live. Check it out tonight. They're talking about planting depths. It'll be a lot of fun. Thanks, everybody, for getting real and getting connected with RealAg Live, and we'll chat again tomorrow. Cheers.